I think a Thanksgiving week release is perfect for today's film because it's good to have a reminder of just how far we've come as a society. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, I got to say, I was very happy to have Oscar winner Alan Ball with us today, and his film Uncle Frank premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020. And it was very well received by the audience in the theater. I know we don't really go to theaters as much right now in America, but it was nice to see it with a crowd. And look, you know, it's a period piece, and it should serve as a reminder for how lucky we are to live in the times that we do, where people have the right to be who they are and are more welcomed. And this is a very affirmative piece about somebody dealing with family issues in the late 60s. And it's also a reminder about where we could go if we're not vigilant about looking out for each other and being more accepting of each other. So, you know, Uncle Frank's it's a good film. It's a film that I know you'll enjoy. Alan Ball was very forthcoming about his creative process. So you could check it out on Amazon Prime this week, and I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You know, if you've never read us, you could test drive us by reading the free issue through our Backstory app on an iPad or on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net. And look, Backstory Magazine is my passion project. And I'm thankful for all the podcast listeners who have supported me. It has been very challenging to keep things going the way that I want to during the pandemic. But we're hanging in there, and your support is crucial. So if you want to support us, you could use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a subscription, and you could use that at our website. That's save and the number 5. And thanks for considering supporting us. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our chat with writer-director Alan Ball about his latest film, Uncle Frank. Okay, Alan, it's good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. You know, it's I saw this. You'll be happy to know it's Sundance with a packed house at the Eccles Theater. So in this time when it's very difficult to see movies, I enjoyed Uncle Frank at its finest in Eccles with a very enthusiastic crowd. But before we get to that exactly, I just want to kind of go back to your past and give everybody a kind of like a baseline for you. The last time you were in this screening series and podcast, we did Talhead, I believe.
Wow.
So it's been a minute.
A while ago.
Well, so I know you went to University of Georgia and Florida State University, and you were interested in playwriting, and you ended up at the General Nonsense Theater Company. Tell us about some of the plays you were doing before you came out to Hollywood.
Well, the General Nonsense Theater Company, which also eventually was based in Sarasota, Florida, and eventually became the Alarm Dog Rep Theater Company in New York City. We did all original work, and I doubt if you would have heard of anything that we did. We started out kind of as a sketch comedy troupe, and eventually started doing one acts and eventually full-length plays. And for me, it was a great experience because I was a writer as well as an actor and a director. So, and I think all of that really helped me. I think being an actor made me a much better writer because I'm aware when I'm writing if lines that I'm writing are things that would be really difficult to actually say.
Sure.
And then I wrote a play called Five Women Wearing the Same Dress. That was about bridesmaids in a big society wedding in Knoxville, Tennessee, and that was produced off Broadway in New York by the Manhattan Class Company. And I think that was like 1995. And a talent scout for Carsey Warner Television saw it and requested a copy of it. And then I got offered a job to write for a television show called Grace Under Fire that was running at that time. And that's when
you ended up not only writing it, but also a story editor on it as well. And then on Sybil as well, a few years later. What was your most important lesson that you learned about writing, going from playwriting to screenwriting, for TV especially?
Well, the thing I learned from my TV work is it's very different. There is a certain reverence for the script in theater that doesn't at least in the sitcoms I worked for, didn't really exist. The writing was something that could always be thrown out and always changed. But I think the biggest lesson I learned was one of discipline. You had to finish, you had to stay, and you had to stay until the script was done. And I also learned a lot about economy. If no matter how funny a scene was, if it didn't really further the story, it would go. So those were two lessons that I learned. Two other lessons I learned that were based on the network notes that we got that I had to unlearn later. I feel like all the notes we got could be basically synthesized in two ideas. One is articulate the subtext, and the other is make everybody nicer. And those are death to good drama.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a while. And actually, when I wrote the pilot for 6 Feet Under, I was still operating with that network note mentality. And one of the notes I got from HBO around the first script was, the whole thing feels just a little too safe. Could you just fuck it up a little bit more? And I sort of felt like I've found the right place for me to be.
That's great. That's the best note ever. Well, so, speaking of 6 Feet Under, and I could do a whole episode on it. I love the series, but it was interesting because eventually All Signs of Death was an HBO show that you worked on that didn't make it through. And after the success of your previous work, I was very surprised. What could you tell us? I'm not trying to dig up any old wounds here, but what was the lesson that you learned that you could impart to other writers that are going through some sort of development hell?
Well, I think, I've been very fortunate in that I've had projects that were extremely successful, and I've had projects that were, for lack of a better word, huge bombs. And you can't always, a lot of times things work for reasons that are out of your hands. It seems to be very timely. It's the perfect marriage between the material, the character, and a specific actor. You just have to realize that not everything is going to go, and sometimes things are not going to go, and that's going to be painful, but that's part of it. And a lot of times, I think we tend to learn more from, for lack of a better word, failures than we do from successes. And
so was the lesson there, know when to step away, I guess?
The lesson there for me was like, it's not always going to land. It's, you can work on, I still think one should, pour oneself into everything one does with one's heart and soul, but also just, you can't be attached to everything being successful because it's just not going to be.
We're going to get to Uncle Frank in a couple minutes, but I just want to touch on American Beauty for a second. Obviously, you won an Oscar and a WGA award when you were 42 years old for American Beauty. It's a great film. And what felt different when you were writing it, if anything?
I wrote American Beauty when I was working on sitcoms, and I would spend all day in the writer's room and sometimes till late hours in the evening. And I felt like the work that I was doing was factory work. I felt like we were just churning out product. There were a lot of very talented people involved, but ultimately I didn't really think the show was about anything. It was just about people in designer clothes trading insults. And I missed that visceral connection to my work that I had back when I was working in these tiny little theater companies in the basements of New York and Brooklyn, when I wasn't making a living at it, but I was doing it just out of the sheer joy of it. And I missed that. And I think I just instinctively knew that I had to write something that I cared about. I had to write something that mattered, even if it was just to me. And I don't think it's a mistake that the main character in American Beauty is a writer who has lost his passion for life. Because I think I was writing that at a time when I was on the verge of losing my passion for my work. So I knew when I was working on it that it had something. There was some substance to it. It meant something. It was about something. I had no idea that it would become the phenomenon that it did become. That surprised nobody more than it did me. but I did know that I'm once again I'm writing something I care about. So that was a big lesson for me, and I try to do that with everything I do now.
Steering it towards Uncle Frank a bit, just for a second, there's Uncle Frank features a gay protagonist, which is, always great and refreshing to see. And in American Beauty, which came out in 1999, it has, a kind of mismatched signal between Frank and Lester, his neighbor, who clearly, although a tough military man, has some repressed gay feelings that he either hasn't explored. We actually never know. Part of the interesting thing is it's not really clear what his past is, and we just see it kind of come out in the moment. That was, interesting to introduce in your work, because obviously you kept introducing characters that have more screen time as gay characters thereafter. What were your goals with that Frank and Lester moment?
Well, in the original script of American Beauty, there was a history. There was Colonel Fitz had a relationship with another soldier in Vietnam, and he had been killed in an ambush, and we saw that.
You saw it as a flashback?
We saw it as a flashback. That got cut out because it just felt like we were tipping the story, and we were telegraphing exactly where we were going to go. I don't really think about it. I don't really think, I need to put a gay character in this to advance this, whatever acceptance of gays in entertainment or culture or something like that. I don't think that way. It just happens. I mean, I'm gay myself, so I certainly, the experience of living in America, modern day America, as a gay man is something that I'm familiar with and that it matters to me, but it's not the only thing that, motivates me. And I also hope that the gay characters that in my work are more than just gay, that that's not the only defining thing about them.
Well, I mean, I would ask the same thing about, David from 6 Feet Under and Lafayette from True Blood. They're also gay characters, very different in their own rights. Did you have any certain goals of how to portray those characters in your work?
Each time it's different. I mean, I wanted David to be as fully fleshed out and to have a lot of conflicts in his own life that weren't just about being gay. But the main conflict about him being gay was with himself. He was at the beginning of that series, he was just embarking on a journey of self-acceptance, and I feel like he got there by the end. Lafayette is different. Lafayette was beyond accepting of himself from the first moment we saw him. I don't know. It organically, gay characters seem to find their way into my work, or I'm interested in exploring their experiences. But there were no gay characters in Towelhead. Right. Which is maybe the only thing I've ever written that didn't have a gay character in it.
I want to talk about your creative habit for a second. When you sit down to write, how important is outlining to your process? Obviously, with a TV background, it would seem that, outlining is very, very important. But is
Outlining's super important in television. When I'm writing features, I don't outline.
Really, at all?
I think about things, I ruminate about things for a long time, and then I sit down and start. But I like to do it that way because then the writing becomes a journey of discovery, and that's really gratifying. That being said, it doesn't always work out. I have tons of files of like 20, 30 pages of things that I started that just ran out of steam, and I had no idea what to do with them. And eventually,
do you even have a sense? Sorry to interrupt. Do you even have a sense of your ending? Do you sometimes reverse engineer in which, even though you didn't put it in outline form, generally where you're headed? Or do you like the expanse of the blank page?
I like the expanse of the blank page. Like I said, it doesn't always work, and a lot of times I'll find myself halfway through a script, 2/3 of the way through a script, and I realize I've got to figure out what's going to happen by the end, and just sort of write a very bullet point outline of the last 20, 30 pages to myself to be able to finish it. But it's different. Every script is different. Every script surprises me, and I like that. That may just be rationalization for being undisciplined, but it is something that I like, and I feel like it's worked enough times for me to continue to try it out as a process.
When you sit down to write, how important is a page count versus the hours you spend?
You know, a page count is not really that important to me when I sit down to write. If I can get one good page or one good half a page, I'm happy. There are times when inspiration takes over and I sit down and I'll write 8, 9, 10 pages. There are also times when I'll write 8, 9, 10 pages and I'll go back and read it and like, oh, well, 3 of these are good, but the rest of them need to go or aren't important. It's not an easy process. I spend a lot of time fiddling around, trying to find the right music to listen to when I'm working on this particular script. Going back and reading everything that I've written up to this point. But I think for me, the discipline is just to sit down and put myself in the chair at the keyboard, staring at the screen. And then I try not to worry too much about what happens for the amount of time I'm there, as long as something happens.
Well, so it sounds like an hourly limit then. Do you have a certain amount of hours that you like to put in each day?
Mm-mm. Some days
so it changes.
Other days I'll spend the whole day here in my office. So it's very free form.
Okay. And what do you do if you get? Sorry to interrupt. Go on.
Or perhaps undisciplined.
The lag of Zoom always is cursing. Yeah. What do you do if you get writer's block? How do you handle it if you get it?
I step away. Sometimes I need to step away. So I'll either just completely step away and not write for a while, or I'll try to work on something else. Because sometimes you need time away from something so that when you come back to it, you have a little bit of a fresher perspective. You're not quite so wrapped up in the world of it, so that you can't see what's working and what's not working and what's necessary and what's not necessary. So
that makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. When it comes down to the concept for Uncle Frank, essentially it's an identity crisis. That's a really important theme here. And it was the way that gay men and women felt in America and the world in 1969, 1970, when this is taking place, and before, because of the flashbacks. Right. What set you on this journey of Uncle Frank? What was your starting point?
30 years ago, I was living in New York City, and I went home to my hometown of Marietta, Georgia, to come out of the closet to my mother. And I did. And she said, well, I blame your father for this because I think he was that way too.
Oh, okay.
Which was a big shock to me. I don't know if it's true. My dad was already dead at that point, so I never had a chance to talk to him about it. But then the next day, we were driving around North Georgia, my mother and I, and we drove past a lake. And she very nonchalantly said, that's where Sam Lassiter drowned. And I said, who's Sam Lassiter? And she said, he was a real good friend of your daddy's. And this was all news to me. And I found out that my father had accompanied Sam's body on a train back to their hometown of Asheville, North Carolina. And my dad was a very mysterious man to me. He wasn't very expressive. And I'm sorry about the phone. He seemed to me like he always had some secret tragedy that he was carrying, some horrible event that he had lived through. And so all of these sort of like started, opened up a window in my head of what if that were the case? What might that story have been? And it kind of percolated for about 25 years. And then 4 or 5 years ago, I sat down to write a script, and Uncle Frank is what came out.
That's fantastic. I mean, because it really is organic, obviously, to your life experience. Tell us what.
Not because it's basically a whole imagination of something that might have taken place.
Exactly.
I don't know for sure that it did, but I kind of like that.
And I'm curious about your process, just the last couple questions before we get into spoiler stuff. Just as a director, when you walk onto a set, how important is it that you're walking in with storyboards and a shot list, or do you sometimes like to find your scenes?
It depends on the project. It depends on the DP. It depends on what the relationship with the DP is and how much time and resources you've had to actually prep. We had a pretty extensive shot list for Uncle Frank, but I don't think we really had any storyboards. But Khalid Motasseb, who is the amazing cinematographer,
it looks beautiful.
Shot the movie. He all of our scouting, he was there with his camera, he was there with his video camera, and he had like up to the minute apps for shot listing and blocking and everything. It was pretty cool. So we knew how we were going to shoot things, but sometimes on the day you just change. Sometimes you get there and you're like, you know what, this doesn't really work, or you're running out of time and you have to consolidate. I like to be as prepared as possible, but I don't like to be overly prepared. It's like when you're rehearsing with actors. You want to rehearse to get them to the point where things are starting to happen. They're starting to discover things, and then you want to stop because you want them to discover things when the camera's rolling.
Did you have time for rehearsal on Uncle Frank?
We only had 2 days, and it was basically Paul and Peter and Sophia and I sitting around a table reading through the script, and we did that for 2 days, and then we started shooting. I mean, this movie was super guerrilla filmmaking. We did not have the resources and the time and the budget that I would have liked, but I think we did enough.
Well, I've got to ask, just because you're a theater geek, in your roots, rehearsal is so integral to theater. And in film, it's often shunned, in which people say things like, I want to discover it on the day or on the scene, but you're discovering it at such a huge cost of resources that, in theater, with the same cost amount, an expensive production, they time it, they rehearse it, they get it down, and they discover it during rehearsal, and then, use memory recall and relive the moments through the performances. What are your views on that as now a seasoned, film director, having come from theatrical roots? Do you think that there's any worth to rehearsal in film, or do you really believe in just the magic of finding it in the moment, something that, you would never do with a play, obviously?
Right. I do believe that rehearsal is important, and also a lot of it depends on the actors, if they like to rehearse, if they want to rehearse. But I do feel like rehearsal is important up until a point. I've had situations where an actor really wanted to rehearse a scene and they've peaked in the rehearsal. And then when it came time to shoot the scene, they couldn't get back there. Or they were trying to recreate something that had already happened.
Interesting.
So I like it up to a point, but the minute things start to happen and those moments of kind of discovery and when those start to happen, for me, that's when, okay, let's start shooting, or let's hold off until we start shooting, because the best things, the best things that happen are spontaneous. And it's different from theater, because theater by its very nature is not spontaneous, because the actor has to be here at the specific point so that they're in their light. But with filmmaking, I think you want to capture that spontaneity. So I like to be just rehearsed enough so that people aren't asking questions like, what is this scene about? We've already figured that out, but they are, by the time the camera's on their close-up, they're relaxed enough and comfortable in it that things start to happen spontaneously.
Okay. That makes sense. We're going to get into the what was your budget and schedule? Sorry, I forgot to ask that.
Our budget was $5 million.
Oh, wow.
You got under $5 million, and we had 25 days.
Wow. Okay. You got a lot in there. Well, podcast listeners, YouTube listeners, watchers, whatever you are now, because we just started our YouTube channel during the pandemic. Press pause, go rent Uncle Frank any way you can through the different channels that you've all been using during this silly pandemic, and then come back and listen to the rest of this episode, because we're going to now get into spoilers. One thing that's important is point of view. Mm-hmm. And knowing how personal this story is to you, it's interesting that Sophie is the narrator, and that it starts with her, and we see it kind of through her eyes getting into Frank's world. But then you switch point of view. There's very important scenes between Frank and Waleed, who, Sophie's not around at all. She is kind of on the edges often, but she's not there. Tell us how you decided to split up your point of view with the introduction of Sophie.
I'm not sure it was a conscious decision. My process is pretty, for lack of a better word, unconscious, organic. I think possibly because I was coming of age myself in 1973, I felt like that might be an interesting. I wanted to see Frank at first as a really, really respected figure, and to sort of see him with his knowledge and his sort of cosmopolitan, how kind he is with his niece, sort of presenting her a picture of a life that could exist for her outside of this small town and this family that she's part of. And then once he started to really spiral out of control, I don't know. It just was a unconscious, organic choice. I was always thinking in the back of my head of the movie To Kill a Mockingbird, which is
interesting,
one of my favorite movies of all time. And I remember people asking at the beginning of the process, well, is this Beth's movie or is it Frank's movie? And to which I would say, well, is To Kill a Mockingbird Scout's movie or is it Atticus's movie?
Right. That's interesting.
And I guess
I see that now that you say it. I didn't think of it at all at the time, of course.
Yeah. So it just felt like something, I couldn't give you a well-articulated reason for why.
No, that makes sense.
Why I did it, but it just sort of, that's the way it came out.
Getting to the meat of the project, something that was really admirable that you did that is a real issue back in 1969 and obviously still today, is the identity crisis of someone who's closeted, who hasn't come out to their family, can lead to drugs and alcohol. Yeah. In the gay community. Now, of course, straight people do drugs and alcohol all the time as well. It is not in any way special to the gay community, but it is tagged specifically to the identity crisis, which exacerbates it sometimes in the gay community. And you chronicle that here. And I'm curious, at what point you realized that was going to be a part of your story, and especially for a big climax with Waleed and Frank confronting it, which leads to, Frank finally bringing Waleed to his family.
I think that was always there. Certainly, as I did progressive drafts of the script, it became more and more pronounced. I just think any situation where a person feels like they have to hide a fundamental part of who they are is going to lead to shame. And shame is a very corrosive, very painful emotion that most people will look for any way to get away from it. And so, drugs, alcohol, compulsive sex, shopping, gambling, video game addiction. There's all kinds of ways in the world to try to avoid it and to try to distract oneself from it, but it's not going to go away until you confront it and you deal with it.
Well, and you had a good bookend in which, she's bringing his own words back to him, because he encouraged her to go off to college, in New York, not to listen to the family about where she needs to go or if she needs to go. And, she encourages him to be himself as well. So like that setup and payoff, worked, I thought, really well as well. I was going to talk about where the Sam idea came from. You made that very clear in the beginning. For anyone now that has seen the movie, we fully understand that. Yeah. I guess the only question I would be is like, I could see that being a modular event in your editing in which you could move around when you're going to reveal that information. Did it change at all, or did it always hit in the same place as it wound up in the script?
It pretty much stayed the way it was. There was a moment where, because it's not revealed completely in a linear fashion, like you reveal that Sam killed himself, and then later you reveal that Frank had this conversation with him that might have been the motivator. And that always felt the best way to do it. But there was talk at one point of people wanting it to be linear, and I just didn't feel like that was the best way to reveal that information. And luckily for me, we had a friends and family test screening, and Bill Block, the head of Miramax, really, really thought that the way it was handled was perfect. So at that point, I could say, well, but the money guy likes it, so I can't do anything. I can't change it.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. That's right. You could see us over at backstory.net or via the Backstory app on an iPad. And, we're a cool film magazine. What can I tell you? It's the only magazine in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety and interviews the screenwriters who made them possible. So, there's a lot of good things to talk about. If you've never read us, please test drive us by reading the free issue. I hope you'll do that. And consider subscribing. If you want to subscribe, you could use coupon code SAVE5, that's SAVE and the number 5. That'll save you $5 at our website, and your credentials will work on an iPad as well. And it'll give you access to whatever we're doing new, and also our archive as well. Our archive currently goes back to issue 30, and I'm continuing to add new old issues because our archive got zapped earlier this year, and we have to upload old issues one article at a time each issue, so it's taking forever. And we also want to publish new content, which is our focus, so we're doing that as well. So it's kind of like bridging the gap between the two is what we're doing. But look, your support means everything to us. It's not easy to do during a pandemic, and really, my podcast listeners, you've been with me for years. So if you were ever going to consider supporting the Backstory Magazine, now would definitely be the time that would be most helpful if you're able. And if you're not, I understand. It's a crazy world that we're living in. But, we're getting ready to publish issue 42, our long-awaited quarantine pandemic issue. It's going to be packed with really cool stuff. And even after we publish, I sometimes add new articles. And on this one, there's a script I've been trying to get for 8 years, maybe 9 years. And the screenwriters basically decided, he will let me publish this the screenplay with an interview. So that might be added after we publish. I don't want to delay the issue for it. But there's a lot of really cool stuff in there. So I'll do a standalone episode to tell you about what's inside. And look, your support means everything to us. Thanks for considering checking out Backstory Magazine. But now, without any further ado, let's return to our chat about Alan Ball, writer-director Alan Ball's new movie, Uncle Frank, which you could see on Amazon Prime. And I highly recommend that you do. Let's jump right back into our chat with Alan Ball. Editing is the last lesson of storytelling. What were your lessons here? What did you learn about your story and editing that you might not have seen when you were writing it, including deleted scenes as well?
The original screenplay and everything that we shot, the opening, it took longer. It took about 10 minutes longer for them to get on the road. And it just, as great as it was all those characters, it was great moments and everything. We needed to get on the road. And one thing I always learn in both features that I've made is you're going to shoot things that work and they're lovely, but ultimately the movie works better without them. And so you just got to be willing to.
Was there a scene like that you want to call out?
Yeah, there was a scene after Daddy Mac's birthday party. There was a whole scene of the family sitting outside at a table and having lunch. That everybody had lines, and there was a whole thing about you get to see more of Daddy Mac being dismissive and disrespectful to Frank, and you get to see more of the family dynamic. And it was lovely, and it was great. But we needed to get on the road. We needed to get Beth in college, and then we needed to get on the road. So
that makes sense. It was just pacing.
Yeah.
Totally makes sense. There's a bunch of different ways that you could end a film like this. And you showed the emotional roller coaster in the turbulence of Frank's life. And then you do have actually an overall nice reconciliation ending. And unfortunately, as we both know, it doesn't always end so nicely for people when they come out to their families. Was this always your ending, or did you toy with other ideas?
This was always the ending. I knew that it's maybe a little optimistic, given the time.
I found it realistic. He just luckily had an accepting family. It just doesn't always go.
Not everybody was accepting. His brother-in-law was certainly not accepting.
Right.
Aunt Butch was, bless her heart, she saying, "Well, you're going to burn in hell." That's not really accepting either. I wanted to. It was very important to me for the movie to end with both members of a gay couple, especially a middle-aged gay couple, surviving. Because usually you think of Brokeback Mountain, brilliant movie. You think of A Single Man, a brilliant movie. But most movies about
American
men,
Beauty.
Yeah, most movies you about men in love usually end with one of them dying. So it was really important to me that Frank and Wally survive what Frank goes through, and that we know that they're going to be together. They're going to stay together. And it was also important to me that Frank does his own kind of acceptance. It's not just up to everybody to accept Frank. He's got to accept them too. And he does when he says to Aunt Butch, I know that's the best that you can do. And he's accepting who she is, and he's not demonizing her or vilifying her, even though she just told him he's going to go to hell simply for being who he is.
Well, actually, I was going to ask about that earlier, but you walked right into it now. Antagonists in a movie like this, sometimes there are outward forces of people that are very dangerous homophobes. Sometimes it's somebody subtle, like Aunt Butch. Mm-hmm. And, you get a sense of certain places that he is. People give him a look. What was your difficulty for handling the concept of antagonism? Because, his father's unacceptance is there and is very clear as well. But it seems obviously like Frank has that kind of anti-hero arc a little, in which he is his own worst enemy as well. So I know that's tough to grapple with sometimes. What were the challenges that presented for you?
Well, I think certainly Frank was his own worst enemy in that he still, and he was still struggling with the idea that he killed Sam, that it was his fault that Sam killed himself. And that's a terrible, terrible, terrible cross to bear. And ultimately, when he goes to the grave and he says, forgive me, he's talking to Sam, but he's also talking to himself. He knows that he needs to forgive himself. And then his father, I think if you had to say who is the antagonist in this movie, you would have to say it's his father. But Stephen Root is such an amazing actor. And that scene of what he says to Frank, with Frank behind him so Frank can't see him and he can't see the tear that goes down his cheek, it's breaking his heart to say this to his son. Because he really, and later at the funeral when Mama says, he loved you, Frank, he really did. He did in his own way, in his own limited way that just didn't have room for this. And so even though he does such a horrible thing, I felt, and hopefully the movie feels like there is some sympathy for him as well. Because he's just a product of his time and his upbringing and the things that he was taught, and the lies that he was conditioned to believe as truth.
What was your toughest scene as a writer and as a director? What was the scene that you kept sweating on the page, coming back to over and over? And then what was your toughest scene on set?
Interestingly enough, I think the toughest scene for me in terms of writing was maybe that scene with Frank at the graveyard where he's alone with Sam's grave and then Wally and Beth show up. I just wanted to get it right. And several times, a lot of the earlier versions were really overwritten and they were just overwritten. They became a little self-conscious. So that was the hardest one writing. Oddly enough, the most difficult scene to shoot was when they stopped at the ice cream store on the road trip.
Wait, why?
We did not have time, and we didn't have time to get all the proper coverage that we should have gotten or that I would have liked to have had in editing. So we had the rhythm of it always feels to me, because I have an idea in my head of what it should have been. Feels a little truncated and a little awkward, and the way it's shot. It's weird that little scene, which is not really that important a scene in the movie.
I gotta say, I didn't notice. I didn't notice a thing wrong with it, sir. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary there. So you kind of threw me for a loop here.
Yeah.
You were just going to lose the location. The sun was going. What was going? What was the problem with it? We
had to get to another location in like 90 minutes, and we had to get there because of what the light would be like.
Okay.
So in this location, and we were had that crazy big Chrysler convertible and driving it off the road and into almost into a ditch, and just not having the time to get the proper coverage. It was just, we didn't have enough days.
How many cameras were you shooting with?
We usually had 2. Some days we had 3.
Okay. Yeah. And what's next? What are you tinkering on next?
I am working on a pitch for a limited TV series with a production company. We're going to take it out probably the first week of December. So I've been working on this Zoom pitch, which is all new to me. And there's, it's all timed with visuals that we've gotten from the internet and everything. I've got about 4 movie scripts I'm sitting on. Hopefully, if Uncle Frank is well received, maybe somebody will want to greenlight one of them and pay for them. None of them are that expensive. And then I have a TV pilot that I'm just sort of writing just for the fun of it because it's a show that I would like to see.
Wait, are you able to name titles of any of these? I didn't know you had 4 screenplays just sitting around. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I can tell you the titles. One is called What's the Matter with Margie? One is called I Dream of Jean. One is called Unfortunately Yours. And one is called Wrong. It's a slasher movie.
Wrong? Okay. And how long have these been sitting around?
Well, I finished Wrong. I finished Wrong this year. What's the Matter with Margie's been around since season 1 of 6 Feet Under.
Wow.
So people have read them. They've almost happened a couple of times. Cameron Diaz was attached to What's the Matter with Margie for a couple of years before she backed out. People have read them, have passed on them. So hopefully someday one of them will get made.
Yeah, we're happy to publish them with an interview in Backstory Magazine anytime you want to get them out there for more eyes. That's the magazine I run because that could actually be really cool. Well, look, these all sound great, and I would love to see an Alan Ball slasher movie. So not to mess with your oeuvre, I hope that one goes first. But you've been very generous with your time. I really dug Uncle Frank. I think you got a lot done in one small independent movie. It definitely packed a punch, and it was a great story, and it was really nice to hear how personal it was to you. But thanks again for your time, and thanks for chatting with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a really good interview. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer-director Alan Ball for coming on over to chat about his latest film, Uncle Frank. Remember, you could watch Uncle Frank on Amazon Prime, so it's ready for you. It's probably in your pocket right now, right? On your phone, in your Prime Video app. So you make sure to check out Uncle Frank. It's a good flick, and I was really glad that we were able to spend some time with Alan today. And speaking of things to do while you're surfing around online, please check out Backstory Magazine as well. If you've never read us, you could check out our free issue at backstory.net or through the Backstory app. And I think you'll really dig it. We're one of the only magazines in the world that publishes screenplays in their entirety and interviews the screenwriter about their experience. And that's always fun. We don't do it for every article, but we do it for a lot of our articles whenever we can. And, we also interview writers, directors, actors, producers, editors, comic book writers, novelists. Storytelling is our focus. So, it's not easy running a film magazine during a pandemic. So if you were ever going to support us, podcast listeners, now would be a great time to have you join us as a subscriber. And to entice you, if you want to save $5 off a 1-year subscription, you could use coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. You could use it at backstory.net. Your credentials at backstory.net will be able to sign in on an iPad as well. But to use the coupon code, you have to do it at our website. So look, it's my passion project. It means a lot to me if you guys would help support it. I know there's stuff in there that you would definitely enjoy. So thanks for considering Backstory Magazine. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. If you're looking to reach out to me on social media, you can always find me as Yo Goldsmith on Twitter, or of course, Backstory_mag on Twitter. Those are the 2 places I'm most often at. We do have an Instagram account under those same names. I'm going to be tweeting really cool screenshots of our new issue 42, which is coming out soon on both of those sites. I have a Facebook fan page. I don't log on there too often, but that is another way to occasionally reach out to me. Look, it would be great to hear from you however you want to reach out. I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A. Thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.